Our hunting party set out in what should have been late autumn, following reports that had reached our village of a large caribou herd moving along the coastal plains to the east. The caribou were essential to our survival, providing meat and fat and hides that would sustain us through the long, dark months ahead. We traveled light, expecting to intercept the herd within a few days and return to our village within 3 weeks at most, our sleds heavy with enough meat to feed our families through the winter. There were 13 of us in the hunting party, chosen for our skills with weapons and our endurance on long journeys across difficult terrain. We brought sleds pulled by our strongest dogs, the animals eager and well-fed, carrying supplies of dried fish and rendered seal oil to sustain us during the hunt. The first sign of trouble came on the 8th day of our journey, when the wind shifted without any warning. It came from the north, bitter and relentless, carrying temperatures that turned our breath to crystals of ice before it could travel more than a handspan from our mouths. We had all experienced cold before, the kind of cold that makes your bones ache and your fingers clumsy inside thick mittens. But this cold felt different in ways that were hard to describe. This cold felt like the land itself had turned against us, like some ancient spirit of winter had awakened early and decided to test whether we truly belonged in these frozen territories. By the 10th day of our journey, the sea ice had closed behind us completely, cutting off the path we had traveled to reach this place. We stood on a ridge overlooking the frozen expanse and watched the last patches of dark open water disappear under a white sheet that stretched unbroken to the distant horizon. The ice formed with terrifying speed, spreading across the surface like a living thing, claiming territory that had belonged to the sea. The older hunters in our group exchanged glances that communicated volumes without requiring any words to be spoken. We all understood immediately what had happened and what it meant for our survival. The ice had trapped us on a peninsula of frozen land, surrounded on 3 sides by a sea we could no longer cross safely. Nanook was our lead hunter, a man of perhaps 50 winters whose weathered face bore the scars of countless encounters with the great white bears that shared these frozen lands with us. His name meant the same as those powerful creatures, and he carried himself with their patience and their quiet, confident power. When the ice closed and trapped us, he gathered the entire hunting party together and spoke to us calmly and clearly. His voice never rose above a conversational tone, even when delivering news that might mean the deaths of everyone present. That steadiness was part of what made him such an effective leader. Panic in his voice would have spread panic through the group, and panic kills faster than cold in these harsh environments. We have food for perhaps 40 days if we are careful with our rationing, he said, his eyes moving across each face in turn. The caribou herd we were tracking has moved inland, beyond our reach given our current situation. The ice prevents us from returning home by the route we traveled. We must find other sources of food here on this frozen peninsula, or we will not survive to see the spring thaw. These are the facts of our situation. Now we must decide together how to respond to them. The words hung in the frozen air like visible things, solid and heavy and impossible to ignore. 13 men, 40 days of increasingly reduced food rations, and an endless white prison stretching in every direction around us. Some of the younger hunters in our group shifted nervously where they stood, their breath forming clouds that drifted away into the gray, overcast sky. But no one spoke out of turn or gave voice to the fear that we all felt. In our culture, panic serves no useful purpose and is considered a sign of weakness and immaturity. Fear must be acknowledged internally, but then swallowed and transformed into productive action. A man who lets fear control his behavior is a danger to himself and to everyone around him. Siku was the youngest member of our hunting party, barely 20 winters old, with eyes that still held the brightness and optimism of youth despite the harsh life we all led. He had joined this caribou hut specifically to prove himself worthy of being considered a full adult member of our community, to earn his place among the men who provided food and protection for our village. Now he faced a test far greater and more dangerous than anything he had imagined when he volunteered to join us. I watched his young face carefully as Nanook delivered his assessment of our situation, saw the fear flicker across his features, and then settle into something harder and more determined. He would not shame his family or his ancestors by showing weakness in front of the older hunters. Whatever happened, he would face it with the dignity our culture demanded. We made camp that first night after the ice closed in a shallow depression in the landscape that offered some protection from the relentless wind. The dogs huddled together in a tight group, their thick fur already rimed with frost from the moisture in their breath, their body heat creating small clouds of warmth that rose and dissipated into the frigid air. We built walls of packed snow around our sleeping area, cutting blocks with bone knives worn smooth by generations of use, and stacking them with the precision that countless generations of practice had refined. The shelter we created would not be warm by any normal standard of comfort, but it would keep the worst of the wind from stealing the body heat we generated. And in these conditions, that could mean the difference between waking in the morning and never waking at all. Inside the snow shelter that first night of our captivity, we rationed our first reduced meal with careful attention. The dried fish that had seemed plentiful when we departed our village now appeared precious beyond any measure we had previously applied to food. Each man received a portion significantly smaller than what we would normally feed to our sled dogs during a journey. The rendered seal oil we had brought, we decided to save for the coldest nights that surely lay ahead, knowing we would need its concentrated energy when temperatures dropped even further below what we were currently experiencing. We ate our meager portions in complete silence, each man savoring every small bite, feeling the food's warmth spread through our bodies, and knowing that such warmth would become increasingly rare in the days to come. Amaruk was our best tracker, a quiet and observant man whose sharp eyes missed nothing that happened in the world around him. He had spent his entire life reading signs in the snow and ice, following trails that other men could not perceive, understanding the movements of animals through subtle clues that were invisible to less trained observers. After we finished our reduced meal that first evening, he spoke for the first time since Nanook had announced that the ice had closed behind us. His voice was soft but carried complete certainty, the confidence of deep knowledge earned through decades of careful observation and experience. "The seals will still be here beneath the ice," he said, his words drawing the attention of every man in our small shelter. "The ice has not frozen completely solid all the way to the bottom. There will be places where the ice is thinner, breathing holes where the seals must surface to fill their lungs with air. If we can find those breathing holes, we can hunt the seals and provide ourselves with food. It will not be easy hunting, but it is possible." The words brought a visible flicker of hope to the faces around the small space. Seals represented everything we needed to survive in these conditions. Their meat provided protein and nutrients essential for maintaining strength. Their fat and blubber offered concentrated calories that our bodies could burn to generate warmth. Their oil could fuel the small stone lamps we carried, providing both light and heat during the endless dark hours. If we could successfully hunt seals through the ice, we might actually survive until spring brought the thaw that would allow us to travel home. But hunting seals through breathing holes in the ice required patience beyond what most human beings could sustain. The technique involved standing completely motionless beside a small hole in the ice, sometimes for hours on end, sometimes for entire days, waiting for the moment when a seal would surface to breathe. You could not move your body, could not shift your weight from foot to foot, could not even scratch an itch without risking the loss of your prey. The seals could hear through the ice with remarkable sensitivity, could sense vibrations that traveled through the frozen water. Any warning, any hint that a predator waited above, and the seal would simply swim away to another breathing hole, another location where death did not wait patiently above the surface of the ice. Nanook nodded slowly and thoughtfully at Amarook's words, his weathered face showing careful consideration of the suggestion. "Tomorrow at first light we begin searching for breathing holes," he announced to the group. "We will divide our hunting party into smaller groups to cover more territory efficiently. Some will search along the ice edge and the pressure ridges for signs of seal activity. Others will set snares in areas where small game like Arctic hares and foxes might still be moving despite the cold. We waste nothing from this moment forward, not time, not energy, not hope. Every action we take must contribute to our survival." The first night we spent on the ice after being trapped felt longer than any night I could remember experiencing in all my years of life. The wind howled without pause outside our snow shelter, shaking the walls we had built, finding every tiny gap in our clothing and equipment to steal the warmth our bodies produced. We slept pressed close together for shared warmth. Our dogs curled in a protective ring around us, their body heat mixing with ours in the small enclosed space. The darkness inside the shelter was absolute and complete, broken only occasionally by the faint greenish glow of the northern lights dancing across the sky outside, their ethereal light filtering dimly through the snow blocks of our walls. I dreamed that night of summer, of green grass rippling in warm breezes, of clear running water sparkling in bright sunlight, of the sweet smell of wildflowers that bloomed for only a few precious weeks each year in our northern lands. In my dream, I walked through meadows that stretched to every horizon, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face and bare arms, completely free from the weight of heavy winter clothing. The dream felt so real that I could almost taste the freshness of the summer air on my tongue. Then the cold crept back into my awareness, pulling me reluctantly from the pleasant dream, reminding me harshly of where I actually was. I opened my eyes to complete darkness and the sound of breathing from the other men and dogs around me. 13 souls sharing warmth in a frozen world that seemed determined to kill us. Morning came slowly to our camp, the sky outside lightening gradually from absolute black to deep gray to a pale white that seemed to glow from within the clouds. We emerged from our snow shelter stiff and aching, our joints protesting the cold that had settled deep into our bones during the night, despite our best efforts to stay warm. The dogs stretched and shook themselves vigorously, apparently eager for movement and activity despite the brutal temperature. They understood cold better than we humans ever could, their thick double coats holding warmth close to their bodies in ways that our clothing could only approximate no matter how carefully we constructed it. Nanook divided our hunting party into 3 smaller groups as he had promised the night before. Amarook would lead 4 men to search for seal breathing holes along the edge of the solid ice and among the pressure ridges where the frozen surface had buckled and folded. Tuktu, a powerfully built hunter with hands like carved stone, would take 3 others to set snares for hares and foxes in areas where small animals might still be active despite the harsh conditions. I would remain at our base camp with young Siku and 2 other hunters, tasked with building more permanent and efficient shelters and maintaining our equipment in good working condition. The day passed in slow and careful motion, each task taking significantly longer than it would have under normal conditions because of the bitter cold that made our fingers clumsy and our movements sluggish. We cut blocks of packed snow and shaped them into the dome of a proper igloo, creating an enclosed space that would hold our body heat much more efficiently than the simple windbreak we had constructed the night before. The work was physically hard but mentally familiar, and it gave our minds something concrete to focus on besides the gnawing worry about our food situation and uncertain future. Siku worked beside me throughout the day, learning construction techniques that I had learned from my own father decades ago, techniques that my father had learned from his father before him, stretching back through more generations than anyone could count. This knowledge had passed through our family and our community like a living thing, adapting and growing with each generation, but never losing its essential truth about how to survive in these harsh lands. I showed the young man how to cut snow blocks at precisely the right angle, how to arrange them in a spiral pattern that would naturally close into a dome at the top without requiring any additional support. His young hands were clumsy and uncertain at first, but they grew more confident and skilled as the day progressed, and he began to understand the principles behind each technique. The weak winter sun barely climbed above the southern horizon before beginning its descent back toward the long night that dominated this season in our northern homeland. In these latitudes during the depths of winter, daylight lasted only a few precious hours, brief moments of gray illumination between endless stretches of darkness. We worked as quickly as the cold allowed during the limited daylight, knowing that the return of darkness would force us back into our shelters whether we felt ready to stop working or not. The rhythm of light and dark would control our activities completely until spring returned with longer days. Amaruk's search group returned to camp first, arriving just as the last light was fading from the sky. Their faces told the story of their day before any of them spoke a single word. They had found no breathing holes anywhere along the ice edge they had explored, no sign of seal activity anywhere in their search area. The ice had formed too thick and too solid during the early freeze, sealing over the breathing holes that would normally have remained open throughout the winter. Amaruk's eyes held a weariness I had rarely seen in him despite all our years of hunting together, the exhaustion of hope repeatedly raised and then denied through hours of fruitless searching. Tuktu's snare group arrived at camp shortly after Amaruk's group, their news slightly more encouraging. They had found fresh tracks of Arctic hares in a sheltered area among some rocks, and they had managed to catch a single hare in one of their snares. One small hare to be divided among 13 hungry men was hardly a feast by any measure, but it represented something important beyond its limited caloric value. It meant we were not completely alone on this frozen landscape. Other creatures lived here, found food here, survived here despite conditions that seemed impossible. If those small animals could find ways to live, perhaps we could discover those ways too. We divided the single hare that evening among all 13 members of our group, each man receiving only a few small mouthfuls of meat that seemed to disappear almost before they touched our eager tongues. The bones of the hare went into a pot of melted snow hanging over a small fire of seal oil and dried moss, creating a thin broth that warmed us from the inside, even though it provided minimal actual nutrition. We passed the pot around our circle and drank the hot liquid slowly, feeling its heat spread through our chilled bodies like medicine for a sickness we could not name. Nothing was wasted. Even the fur of the hare would be carefully saved, eventually becoming part of a mitten lining or some other useful item. The second day on the ice followed a pattern similar to the first, and the third day repeated that pattern, and the fourth day as well. Amaruk continued leading his group out each morning to search for seal breathing holes, expanding his search range in different directions each day, walking miles across the frozen sea in temperatures that would have killed an unprepared person within hours of exposure. Tuktu's snare group caught occasional hares and once a white fox, its beautiful fur nearly invisible against the snow until they approached close enough to see the snare around its neck. We carefully rationed our remaining supply of dried fish, eating slightly less each day, feeling our bodies begin the slow process of consuming themselves when external fuel became insufficient. By the 20th day of our imprisonment on the ice, the mood throughout our small group had shifted noticeably. The constant hunger that gnawed at our bellies day and night had worn away the sharp edges of hope, leaving behind a dull acceptance that settled over our camp like a second layer of cold added to the already freezing temperatures. Men spoke less frequently, conserving energy for essential movement and thought rather than wasting it on unnecessary conversation. The dogs had grown visibly thin, their ribs becoming apparent beneath their thick coats despite the protection their fur provided against our prying eyes. We fed the animals what little we could spare from our own meager rations, knowing that without the dogs, we would have no way to transport our supplies and equipment if we ever managed to find a path home. Amarok made his crucial discovery on the 23rd day of our captivity on the ice. He had walked farther that day than on any previous search, pushing himself beyond the limits that exhaustion and cold tried to impose on his aging body. Near a massive pressure ridge where the ice had buckled and folded into fantastic shapes under enormous geological forces, he found what he had been seeking for more than 3 weeks. A breathing hole, small and partially frozen over at the edges, but unmistakably a place where seals surfaced to breathe. The hole was no larger than a man's 2 fists held together, but it represented salvation for our entire group. He marked the location carefully in his memory, using landmarks visible from various angles, then returned to camp with the first genuine smile any of us had seen since the ice closed behind us and trapped us in this frozen prison. The seal hunt began early the following morning after Amarok's discovery. He led our entire group to the breathing hole he had found, a journey of several hours across ice that groaned and cracked beneath our feet with every step. The pressure ridge rose around us like frozen ocean waves caught at their peak and turned to solid ice. Massive formations of blue-white ice pushed up by forces we could not see or fully comprehend. Among these fantastic frozen shapes, the breathing hole appeared almost insignificant, a dark spot in the white surface no larger than a man's fist. Easy to miss if you did not know exactly what you were looking for. Hunting seals through breathing holes in the ice required patience that bordered on a form of deep meditation. You could not move any part of your body once you took your position, could not shift your weight, could not turn your head, could barely breathe without risking the loss of your prey. The seal swimming beneath the ice could hear sounds that traveled through the frozen water with perfect clarity. Any vibration, any hint of danger waiting above, and the animal would simply swim away to another hole. The hunter had to become part of the ice itself, as still and cold and patient as the frozen world around him. Only then might a seal trust the silence enough to surface and breathe. Amarok took the first watch at the breathing hole, positioning himself on his knees beside the small opening with his bone-tipped harpoon held ready to strike. The rest of us withdrew to what we judged was a safe distance, far enough away that our movements and sounds would not travel through the ice to alert any seals below. We watched Amarok become completely still, his body transforming from living, breathing flesh into something that resembled the ice formations surrounding him. The minutes stretched into hours as we waited, and still he did not move even slightly. His discipline and patience were extraordinary, the result of a lifetime spent learning to hunt in these harsh conditions. The seal surfaced to breathe just as the weak light was beginning to fade from the gray sky. We heard the splash of water first, then the explosive exhalation of breath as the animal emptied and refilled its lungs with fresh air. Amaruk's harpoon struck true in that instant, the sharpened bone point driving deep into the seal's body before the creature could react and dive back beneath the ice. The seal thrashed powerfully for several seconds, staining the ice around the breathing hole with spreading red, and then grew still. We rushed forward to help drag the heavy body from the water before it could sink, our hands trembling with excitement and desperate hunger as we hauled our prize onto the solid ice. That night we ate seal meat for the first time since our supplies of dried fish had run out. The flesh was rich and dark in color, tasting strongly of the ocean depths from which it came, carrying nutrients and calories that our depleted bodies craved with an intensity that surprised us. We ate the thick layer of fat and blubber raw, feeling its concentrated energy spread through our limbs like fire, warming us from inside. Some of the men drank the blood warmed directly from the body, knowing it contained vital elements that our own blood had lost during the weeks of slow starvation. Nothing was wasted from the animal. The internal organs were cleaned and prepared. The bones were saved for tools. The skin would be processed for leather and waterproofing. Every part of the seal would contribute to our survival in some way. That night we ate seal meat for the first time since our supplies of dried fish had run out. The flesh was rich and dark in color, tasting strongly of the ocean depths from which it came, carrying nutrients and calories that our depleted bodies craved with an intensity that surprised us. We ate the thick layer of fat and blubber raw, feeling its concentrated energy spread through our limbs like fire, warming us from inside. Some of the men drank the blood warmed directly from the body, knowing it contained vital elements that our own blood had lost during the weeks of slow starvation. Nothing was wasted from the animal. The internal organs were cleaned and prepared. The bones were saved for tools. The skin would be processed for leather and waterproofing. Every part of the seal would contribute to our survival in some way. The successful seal hunt changed everything about our situation, not just because of the substantial food the animal provided, though that physical sustenance alone might have been enough to save our lives over the following weeks. The kill changed our understanding of where we were and what was possible for us in this frozen place. We were not trapped on a barren wasteland completely devoid of resources as we had feared. We were living in a place that had sustained people like us for thousands upon thousands of years. The ice was not our enemy, trying to kill us through cold and starvation. The ice was simply a different kind of home, one that required us to learn new skills and adopt new approaches, but a home nonetheless that could support our lives if we adapted properly. Nanook spoke to our group that night as we gathered around the small fire we had built using seal oil rendered from our catch and dried moss collected from rocks. His voice carried more strength and authority than it had held in weeks, the confidence of a leader who had found solid ground beneath his feet after a period of uncertainty. "We will survive this trial," he declared with complete conviction. "The seals are here beneath the ice. The land provides what we need to live. We only need to learn what it offers and accept what it demands in return. This is the wisdom of our ancestors, the knowledge that has sustained our people since the beginning of time." The days that followed our first successful seal hunt settled into a new and more hopeful rhythm. We moved our entire camp closer to the pressure ridge where Amaruk had found the first breathing hole, establishing ourselves in the area where seals were most likely to surface. The hunting remained slow and deeply uncertain, requiring patience that tested even the most disciplined members of our group. Hours of motionless waiting might produce nothing, or might yield the sudden opportunity that meant the difference between eating and going hungry. But gradually and steadily, the seals provided. We caught one animal every few days at first, then more frequently as our skills at this specialized form of hunting improved and we learned the patterns of seal behavior beneath this particular frozen sea. We built a proper winter camp in our new location near the pressure ridge, cutting blocks of snow and ice into sturdy igloos that held our body heat efficiently through the long, dark nights. The seal oil burned in small stone lamps we constructed, providing both light and warmth that transformed our shelters from mere survival structures into something approaching genuine comfort. We stretched the sealskins we accumulated on wooden frames for drying in the cold wind, knowing they would eventually become waterproof clothing, covers for our kayaks if we ever built them, and 100 other useful items. The routine of survival replaced the panic of crisis, and we settled into our new way of life with growing confidence. Young Siku showed an unexpected natural talent for the patient hunting that seal pursuit through breathing holes required. He could stand or kneel at a breathing hole for hours without moving, his young body somehow immune to the restlessness that plagued older hunters who had spent their lives in more active forms of pursuit. The experienced hunters in our group watched him with growing respect as the weeks passed, recognizing skills in him that usually took decades of practice to develop. In Siku, they saw the future of our people, the continuation of knowledge and ability that had kept our ancestors alive since before the beginning of recorded memory. The 40th day of our captivity passed, and then the 50th day. And the weeks continued accumulating into what might have been 2 months or more. Our original supply of food had long since disappeared completely, but the seals continued to provide for our needs. We ate well enough to maintain our strength and health, though never with enough abundance to forget how precarious our situation remained. One unsuccessful week of hunting, one period when the seals avoided our breathing holes, and we would face the same starvation that had threatened us when we first became trapped. The dogs recovered their strength and energy too, their coats growing thick and glossy again, their bodies filling out with the good food we could now provide them. We would need the dogs and their strength when spring finally arrived and the ice began to break apart. The changing climate as winter deepened presented new challenges that tested our adaptability. The temperature dropped to levels that seemed almost impossible, cold so intense that it crystallized the moisture in our breath before the vapor could travel more than a few inches from our mouths. The air itself seemed to hurt when we inhaled it, stabbing at any exposed skin with invisible needles of frozen pain. We learned to breathe through multiple layers of fur held over our faces, warming the air in stages before it entered our lungs. We learned to move constantly when we were outside our shelters, never standing still long enough for the cold to find its way through our clothing to our vulnerable core temperature. One morning, perhaps 60 days into our exile on the ice, a storm arrived that made every previous storm we had experienced seem gentle by comparison. The wind screamed across the frozen surface at speeds that literally knocked men off their feet if they tried to stand against it. Snow flew horizontally through the air, reducing visibility to less than arm's length, turning the world into a white fury that erased all landmarks, all sense of direction, all distinction between ground and sky. We huddled inside our igloos and listened to the ice itself groaning and cracking beneath us, praying silently that the frozen sea would hold together until the storm finally exhausted itself and passed. The storm continued for 3 full days without significant pause. When it finally quieted and we emerged cautiously from our shelters, we found our world completely transformed. The pressure ridge we had camped near had shifted significantly, and the breathing holes we had been using were buried under massive drifts or had disappeared entirely as the ice restructured itself. The paths we had worn across the ice surface through weeks of daily travel had vanished completely, under snow deeper than a man's height in places. Our camp had survived the storm intact, but everything familiar about our surroundings had changed beyond recognition. We would have to begin again from the beginning, finding new hunting grounds and learning new patterns. Amaruk set out immediately after the storm to search for new breathing holes, his determination completely undiminished by this significant setback. The rest of us worked steadily to dig out our camp, recovering equipment and supplies that the storm had buried under heavy drifts. The physical labor was exhausting, but necessary, and it kept our minds productively occupied while Amaruk conducted his search. We had survived worse challenges than this already. We would survive this one too. He found new breathing holes on the second day after the storm ended, a whole series of them in a new location about an hour's walk from our camp in a direction we had not previously explored. The storm had broken the ice in certain places, creating channels and openings where seals could swim and surfaces where they needed to breathe. What had initially appeared to be a disaster had actually created new opportunities. The land was teaching us its lessons again, showing us that change and destruction were not always the same thing, that apparent catastrophe could contain hidden benefits for those patient and observant enough to discover them. The hunting improved significantly after the storm reshaped our frozen environment. The new breathing holes attracted more seals than our previous hunting grounds had provided, perhaps because animals had been driven from other areas by the same ice disruption that had threatened our camp. We caught enough seals in the weeks following the storm to build up a reserve supply of food for the first time since our original provisions had run out. The dried seal meat accumulated in storage pits we dug into the deep snow, insurance against future storms or periods of unsuccessful hunting that might otherwise leave us hungry. Days continued turning into weeks, and weeks accumulated into what might have been months, as winter maintained its grip on our frozen world. We lost precise track of time in the traditional sense, measuring our existence instead by the number of storms we had survived, the number of seals we had caught, and the slow strengthening of the weak light as winter began its gradual surrender to approaching spring. The sun climbed slightly higher above the southern horizon each day, lingering a few minutes longer before sinking back into darkness, painting the ice with colors we had almost forgotten existed during the darkest period of winter. The first subtle signs of approaching spring appeared in ways that only eyes trained through generations of observation could detect and interpret. The texture of the snow changed almost imperceptibly, becoming slightly wetter and heavier as temperatures rose by tiny increments. The ice beneath our feet made different sounds than it had made during the depths of winter, creaking and groaning in new patterns as it responded to warming temperatures that we could not yet feel on our skin. Small pools of meltwater appeared on the surface of the ice, reflecting the sky like tiny mirrors set into the vast white landscape. The seals began hauling themselves out onto the ice surface to bask in the strengthening sunlight, becoming easier targets for our hunters than the breathing hole technique had ever provided. We began preparing seriously for the journey home as the signs of spring continued accumulating. The dogs were strong and healthy again after months of good feeding. The sleds had been repaired and maintained through the long winter. Our equipment was in better condition than when we had first become trapped. We had accumulated more supplies than we had originally brought with us on the hunt, seal meat and rendered oil, and valuable furs that would be welcomed when we returned to our village. The exile that had initially seemed likely to kill us all had transformed into a productive season, a testament to human adaptability and the persistence that had allowed our people to thrive in these harsh lands for countless generations. Nanook chose the specific day of our departure based on signs and indicators that only he fully understood through his decades of experience reading the ice and weather. "The ice is ready for travel," he announced to the group one morning, after spending time observing conditions that seemed unchanging to the rest of us. "The passages are opening between the pressure ridges. We can travel safely to the mainland if we move quickly and carefully, respecting the ice and not taking foolish risks. Tomorrow we begin our journey home." The news brought a complex mixture of emotions throughout our group. We all felt profound relief at the prospect of seeing our families and our village again after so many months of isolation and uncertainty. But mixed with that relief was a strange reluctance to leave the place where we had fought so hard to survive and ultimately succeeded. This frozen wilderness had nearly killed us, but it had also taught us things about ourselves and our capabilities that we could never have learned in easier circumstances. We had formed bonds with this harsh landscape that would never entirely disappear from our hearts. The journey back to the mainland took 12 careful days, threading our sleds through channels in the ice that appeared and disappeared as the spring thaw continued its relentless transformation of the frozen sea. We crossed pressure ridges that had not existed when we first arrived, navigated cautiously around patches of open water where solid ice had stretched unbroken just months before. The dogs pulled strongly and eagerly, energized by the movement and perhaps by some instinct that told them home was finally within reach. The ice groaned and cracked around us constantly, reminders that the frozen surface we traveled was alive and changing with every passing hour. We reached the solid shore of the mainland on a day of unusual warmth, the temperature climbing above freezing for the first time in many months. The shoreline was muddy and brown where the snow had melted away, looking almost ugly after spending so long surrounded by the pure white beauty of the frozen sea. But it was land, solid and permanent ground, connected to the endless interior territories where our people had lived and thrived since before the beginning of memory. We stood on that muddy shore and breathed the air of home, feeling emotions too large and complex for any words to adequately express. The village received us with celebrations and ceremonies that continued for many days after our arrival. We had been given up for dead by some of our relatives, who had watched the ice close early and imagined our fate with growing certainty as the months passed without any word of our survival. Others had continued praying for our return throughout the winter, maintaining hope against all reasonable expectation. Our actual return seemed almost miraculous to those who had mourned us, proof that the spirits of our ancestors still watched over their descendants and guided us through dangers that should have been fatal. We told our stories around fires that burned with wood instead of seal oil, surrounded by faces we had dreamed of during the darkest and coldest nights on the ice. But something fundamental had changed inside each of the 13 men who survived that winter on the ice. We had seen with absolute clarity how thin the line was between life and death, how completely we depended on skills and knowledge passed down through countless generations of ancestors who had faced similar challenges. We had learned that the land would provide for those who listened carefully enough to its teachings, that patience and adaptation ultimately mattered more than raw strength or speed. The ice had been our teacher for those months of captivity, and its lessons would remain with us for the rest of our lives, shaping how we understood ourselves and our relationship with the natural world. Siku especially had undergone a profound transformation during our months of exile. He had departed our village as a boy, seeking an opportunity to prove himself worthy of adult status, eager but untested and uncertain. He returned as a man who had earned his place through actions rather than words, through demonstrated competence in the most demanding circumstances imaginable. The village elders recognized this transformation and honored it, giving him responsibilities and respect that would once have seemed far beyond his years. He accepted these new duties with the quiet confidence we had watched develop through months of patient hunting, learning to stand motionless at breathing holes while his body screamed for movement and warmth. I think often now about the lessons we learned during those months of captivity on the ice. Not just the practical skills of seal hunting and igloo construction and survival in extreme cold, though those skills were certainly valuable beyond any measure we could apply to them. We learned something deeper and more important, something about the fundamental relationship between human beings and the world we inhabit. The ice did not care whether we survived or died. It simply existed according to its own nature, changing according to its own rhythms that had nothing to do with our hopes or fears. Our survival depended entirely on understanding those rhythms and adapting ourselves to them, not on fighting against forces we could never hope to overcome through strength alone. The native peoples of these frozen northern lands had learned this essential lesson long before any of us were born. They had developed ways of living that worked with the ice and cold rather than against them, that found abundance and sustenance where outsiders saw only emptiness and death. Their accumulated knowledge had grown over countless generations, refined constantly by experience, tested repeatedly by failure, preserved carefully by those who survived to pass it on to their children. Each generation added to the store of wisdom while honoring the core truths that had proven their value through centuries of harsh testing. We were part of that unbroken chain now, we 13 who had survived when survival seemed completely impossible. Our experience would become stories told around winter fires for generations to come, lessons that future hunters would learn and internalize before facing their own trials on the ice. The knowledge we had gained would grow and adapt as conditions changed, but it would always carry the essential truth that had saved our lives. The land provides for those who learn its ways. The ice still calls to me even now when my joints ache with age and my eyes have lost much of their former sharpness. I can close my eyes at any moment and feel myself standing motionless beside a breathing hole, waiting with infinite patience for the moment when skill and luck and timing would all come together in a successful strike. The cold no longer frightens me the way it frightens those who have not learned its lessons. The darkness no longer weighs on my spirit as it once did during those first desperate weeks of captivity. I have made my peace with the ice, learned to respect and even love what it teaches, accepted what it demands in return for the gifts it offers. My grandchildren gather around me now and ask me to tell them about that legendary winter, about the time when the food ran out and everyone thought we would surely die on the frozen sea. I tell them the stories as best I can, trying to help them understand not just the events that occurred, but what those events meant and what lessons they contain. I want them to know deep in their bones that survival is not about being stronger or fiercer than the world around you. It is about being wise enough to learn what the world offers and humble enough to accept what it requires in exchange. The seals still come to their breathing holes each winter, surfacing to breathe in the same locations where their ancestors surfaced for thousands of years before them. The ice still forms each autumn and breaks apart each spring according to patterns that existed long before our people came to these lands and will continue long after we are gone and forgotten. We are small and temporary against this vast frozen world, but we are not helpless or without resources. We have our accumulated knowledge, our practiced skills, our ability to adapt and learn and persist through hardship. We have each other, and the bonds of community that multiply individual strength into something much greater. The fire in my home burns low now, the seal oil nearly consumed for this evening. The children around me have fallen asleep one by one as my story continued, their breathing slow and steady and peaceful, their dreams carrying them to places I cannot follow or fully imagine. I will sleep soon too, letting the warmth fade gradually as the night deepens, trusting as I have trusted every night of my long life, that morning will come again, as it always has. The ice waits outside in the darkness, patient and eternal, ready to teach its lessons to anyone willing to learn. The years after our return from the ice passed with the steady rhythm that characterizes life in these northern lands. Summers came and went, brief explosions of green growth and warmth that seemed to pass almost before they properly began. Winters arrived and lingered, testing the skills and patience of each new generation as they had tested every generation before. I continued hunting on the ice for many years after that first desperate winter, my skills and knowledge growing deeper with each season, until I became recognized as one of the most capable seal hunters in our territory. Nanook lived for another 12 winters after our return, his great experience and wisdom guiding our community through challenges both familiar and new. He taught the younger hunters everything he knew about reading ice conditions and weather patterns, about patience and persistence, about the mental discipline required to survive when physical strength alone was not enough. When his heart finally failed during his 62nd winter, we buried him according to our ancient customs, returning his body to the land that had shaped him into the man he became. His wisdom lived on in those of us who had learned from his example, particularly the foundational lesson that had saved all our lives. The land provides for those who learn to listen. Amaruk continued his patient hunting long past the age when most men would have yielded to younger hunters and taken easier roles in village life. His eyes eventually failed him, surrendering to the cumulative damage of decades spent staring at bright ice under winter sun, a condition that claimed many experienced hunters in our lands. But even after blindness took his sight, he could still find breathing holes by listening to subtle sounds inaudible to others, by feeling vibrations in the ice through his feet and hands, by senses that had developed far beyond normal human capability through a lifetime of careful attention. The younger hunters would lead him to promising locations and position him properly, and he would still catch seals with a success rate that embarrassed many hunters with perfect vision. Siku grew into the leader that his early promise had suggested he would become. His quiet confidence earned the respect that louder and more aggressive men could never quite achieve through their demands and boasting. He led hunting expeditions across vast territories, negotiated diplomatically with neighboring groups, represented our village in councils where important decisions were made. But he never forgot the lessons of that first winter on the ice, never lost the patient discipline that had allowed him to stand motionless for hours while his young body demanded movement and his mind urged him to give up. That patience served him well in every role he took on throughout his long and productive life. The hunting techniques we developed and refined during our captivity on the ice spread throughout our region in the years following our return. Other villages sent their young hunters to learn from those of us who had survived, and we taught them freely everything we knew. The knowledge became part of the common heritage of our people, available to anyone willing to invest the time and effort required to master the necessary skills. Some hunters built upon what we taught them, developing innovations and improvements that we had never imagined. The wisdom grew and evolved as living knowledge always does, but it never lost touch with the fundamental truths we had learned through desperate necessity. I married in the 5th year after our return from the ice, taking as my wife a woman who had waited patiently through all the months when everyone else assumed I was dead and gone forever. She bore me 4 children who survived infancy, each of them strong and healthy and curious about the world they had been born into. I taught my sons to hunt as my father had taught me, taking them onto the ice when they were old enough, showing them the breathing holes and the patient techniques required to hunt successfully. My daughters learned from their mother and from other women in our village, mastering the equally essential skills of preparing hides and sewing clothing and managing the resources that kept families alive through long winters. Each of my children grew up hearing the story of the winter when the food ran out and their father learned what the ice could teach. They heard about Nanook's steady leadership, Amaruk's patient tracking, Siku's unexpected talent for stillness, They learned the names of the other men in our hunting party, what each one contributed to our collective survival, how we supported each other through the hardest times. The story became part of their understanding of who they were and where they came from, connecting them to a specific moment in the long history of our people when survival hung by the thinnest of threads. The grandchildren came in time, as grandchildren always do for those fortunate enough to live long lives. They were born into a world that had changed in some ways from the world I had known in my youth, but the fundamental realities remained the same. The ice still formed each winter. The seals still surfaced to breathe. The cold still demanded respect and careful preparation from anyone who wished to survive its embrace. I told the old stories to the young ones, trying to make them understand not just what happened, but why it mattered, what it revealed about the relationship between human beings and the natural world that sustained us. Some of the grandchildren showed the same aptitude for patience that young Siku had demonstrated so many years ago. They could sit quietly for hours when other children fidgeted and complained. Their attention focused completely on whatever task occupied them at the moment. I recognized that quality when I saw it, understood what it might become in the right circumstances with proper training. I took special care with those children, teaching them everything I knew about reading ice and understanding seal behavior, preparing them for the challenges they might face in their own lives. The winters grew somewhat milder during my later years, the ice forming a little later and breaking up a little earlier than it had in my youth. Some of the elders worried about what this change might mean for our people, whether the hunting patterns we had developed over generations might become less reliable as conditions shifted. Others pointed out that our ancestors had adapted to changes before, and we would adapt to whatever came next. The essential skill was not knowing exactly what to do in every specific situation, but knowing how to learn what each new situation required. I am an old man now, older than Nanook was when he died, older than any of the 13 who survived that winter on the ice except for young Siku, who somehow remains strong and active despite his advancing years. The others have passed on one by one over the decades, joining the ancestors whose wisdom guided us through our trial. I remember each of them clearly, their faces and voices preserved in my memory like precious objects kept safe from the weathering of time. They were my brothers in the deepest sense, bound to me by experiences that no one who was not there could ever fully understand. The story of our survival has become one of the great teaching stories of our people, told and retold around winter fires throughout the territories where our language is spoken. Different tellers emphasize different aspects of the experience, drawing out whatever lessons seem most relevant to their audiences and circumstances. Some focus on the practical techniques of seal hunting through breathing holes, the specific skills that can mean the difference between eating and starving. Others emphasize the importance of community and mutual support, how 13 men working together accomplished what none of them could have achieved alone. Still others use our story to illustrate the proper relationship between humans and the natural world, the balance of taking what we need while respecting what sustains us. All of these interpretations contain truth, partial glimpses of something too large and complex to be captured in any single telling. What we experienced during those months on the ice was a complete education in survival, covering physical skills and mental discipline and social cooperation and spiritual understanding, all woven together into a single, overwhelming challenge. We emerged from that experience changed in ways we could not have predicted and barely understood even as they were happening. The ice stripped away everything unnecessary from our lives and characters, leaving only what was essential for survival. What remained was stronger and clearer than what had been before. The northern lights dance across the sky tonight as I sit by my fire and remember. The green and purple ribbons of light wave and shimmer in patterns that seem almost intentional, as if some great artist were painting on the black canvas of the sky. I have seen these lights thousands of times in my long life, but they never lose their power to fill me with wonder. They are part of this place, part of what makes these frozen lands beautiful despite their harshness, part of why my people have chosen to live here since time beyond memory. Tomorrow will bring whatever tomorrow brings, as it always has and always will. The young hunters will go out onto the ice if conditions permit, seeking seals to feed their families through the remaining winter months. The women will work at their tasks, preparing hides and sewing clothing and caring for children who represent the future of our community. The elders will offer advice and tell stories, sharing the accumulated wisdom of long lives filled with experiences both difficult and joyful. Life will continue in its ancient patterns, adapted to new circumstances, but connected through an unbroken chain to everything that came before. The fire burns low as midnight approaches, the seal oil nearly exhausted. I should add more fuel or let the flames die and wrap myself in sleeping furs until morning comes. Instead, I sit quietly, watching the last light flicker against the walls of my home, thinking about all the fires I have tended through all the years of my life. Each one was a small victory against the darkness and cold, a declaration that life would continue for at least one more night. This fire is no different, even though I know there cannot be many more such nights remaining for me. The ice taught me not to fear death, though it took many years for that lesson to fully penetrate my understanding. Death is simply part of the great cycle that governs everything in the natural world, as inevitable as the formation of ice each autumn and its melting each spring. The seals we hunted died so that we could live. The plants and small animals that fed the seals died to sustain them. Everything is connected in a vast web of giving and receiving, living and dying, taking and being taken in turn. To fear death is to misunderstand our place in this web, to imagine ourselves somehow separate from and superior to the forces that govern all life. What I learned on the ice was how to live fully within each moment, not wasting precious energy on regrets about the past or fears about the future. When you are standing motionless beside a breathing hole in temperatures cold enough to kill you, all that matters is that precise moment and what it requires. The seal will come or it will not come. You will eat or you will go hungry. You will survive or you will not survive. These realities focus the mind wonderfully, stripping away all the mental clutter that accumulates during easier times. I try to maintain that clarity of focus even now, when the immediate threats are less dramatic than they were during that desperate winter. Each day brings its own challenges and opportunities, its own moments that deserve complete attention and presence. The grandchild asking a question deserves a thoughtful answer. The meal shared with family deserves appreciation and gratitude. The beauty of sunlight on fresh snow deserves wonder and acknowledgement. Life is made up of these moments strung together, and each one is precious beyond calculation. The younger people in our village sometimes grow impatient with the pace of life here, dreaming of distant places and different ways of living. I understand their restlessness, because I felt something similar when I was young, the urge to see what lay beyond the familiar horizons. But I have come to understand that the most important journeys are not always the ones that cover great distances. Sometimes, the most transformative journey is the one that takes you deep into where you already are, teaching you to see with fresh eyes what you thought you already knew completely. The ice taught me that lesson more thoroughly than any other teacher could have. During those months of captivity, I traveled no farther than a few miles from our camp, Yet I journeyed to the very edges of human endurance and learned things about myself that decades of ordinary life might never have revealed. The external landscape was limited and monotonous, endless white in every direction. But the internal landscape proved inexhaustible, filled with discoveries that continue to unfold even now in my final years. Some of the stories told about our survival have grown with time, accumulating embellishments and dramatic flourishes that were not part of the original experience. This is the nature of storytelling, the way that narratives evolve to serve the needs of each new audience and teller. I do not object to these elaborations because they carry forward the essential truths even when they alter the specific details. What matters is not the exact number of seals we caught or the precise temperatures we endured, but the fundamental lessons about patience and adaptation and community that our experience illustrated so clearly. The true story, as I lived it, was simultaneously more ordinary and more extraordinary than the elaborate versions that have developed over the years. It was ordinary in the sense that it consisted mainly of repetitive daily tasks, the same basic activities repeated again and again through endless cold and darkness. It was extraordinary in the sense that those ordinary activities took on cosmic significance when survival depended on their proper execution. Cutting snow blocks became an act of profound meaning. Standing motionless at a breathing hole became a form of prayer. Sharing a meager meal became a celebration of human connection and mutual support. I hope that whoever tells this story after I am gone will preserve that balance between the ordinary and the extraordinary, helping listeners understand that heroism is usually not dramatic but quiet, not sudden but sustained over long periods of monotonous effort. The Hollywood version of survival stories emphasizes moments of crisis and spectacular action, but the real experience is mostly about persistence through conditions that slowly erode strength and hope. The heroes are those who simply refuse to stop trying, who maintain their discipline and focus when every part of their being wants to give up and surrender to the easier path of death. The fire has burned down to embers now, barely enough light remaining to see the familiar shapes of my home. I should rest, preserve my own strength for whatever tomorrow may require. But I find myself reluctant to let go of this moment, this quiet communion with memory and meaning that the late hour makes possible. The dead are close tonight, my old companions from the ice, and I would like to spend a little more time in their company before sleep claims me. Nanook would tell me to be practical, to tend to the needs of the body rather than indulging the wanderings of an old man's mind. He was always the most grounded among us, the most focused on the immediate requirements of each situation. But I think he would also understand what I am doing tonight, honoring the experience we shared by giving it the attention and reflection it deserves. Stories keep the dead alive, and telling stories is how we show that we have not forgotten what they taught us. Amaruk would probably say nothing at all, his silence speaking more eloquently than any words could. He was a man of few words but deep understanding, able to communicate through a glance or a gesture what others struggled to express in long speeches. I can feel his presence tonight in the quiet that surrounds my home, the same quality of attentive stillness that made him such a remarkable hunter. He is listening, I think, even though he has been gone for many years now. Young Siku, no longer young but still carrying the brightness that characterized him from boyhood, would probably laugh and tell me to stop being so serious. He always had a gift for finding lightness in heavy moments, for reminding us that survival was not just about grim endurance, but also about finding reasons to continue that made the effort worthwhile. Joy and humor were survival tools as important as any harpoon or snow knife. He understood that instinctively, and it was one of the qualities that made him such an effective leader in later years. The others would respond in their own characteristic ways, each voice adding to the chorus that echoes through my memory. They were individuals first, with their own personalities and quirks and strengths and weaknesses. The experience we shared did not erase those differences, but rather revealed them, showing how diversity of character and ability could combine into something stronger than any uniform group would have been. We needed the patient ones and the impatient ones, the talkers and the silent ones, the optimists and the realists. Together, we formed a complete human community, capable of facing challenges that would have defeated any single individual. The first hint of morning light is beginning to show on the eastern horizon, a faint gray glow that promises the return of the sun. I have stayed awake through the entire night, lost in thoughts and memories that demanded attention they rarely receive during the busy hours of ordinary days. It is time now to rest, to let the stories settle back into their accustomed places in my mind, to prepare for whatever this new day will bring. But before I sleep, I want to say this to anyone who has followed this story through its long, winding path. The ice is still there, waiting as it has always waited, ready to teach its lessons to anyone brave enough to venture onto its surface and humble enough to learn what it offers. The seals still rise to breathe through holes in the frozen surface. The cold still demands respect from those who would survive its embrace. The wisdom accumulated by countless generations of my people still lives in the hearts and minds of those who have inherited it. You, who hear this story, are now part of that inheritance, connected by the thread of narrative to experiences that might otherwise have vanished without trace. What you do with this connection is up to you. Perhaps these words will simply entertain you for a time before fading into the background of your busy life. Perhaps they will plant seeds that sprout later when you face your own trials and challenges. Perhaps they will change nothing at all, passing through your consciousness like water through sand. But I hope, more than anything, that this story helps you understand something true about the relationship between human beings and the world that sustains us. We are not conquerors of nature, but participants in its endless cycles. We survive not by dominating our environment, but by learning to live within it respectfully and attentively. The land provides for those who learn its ways, but it provides nothing for those who approach it with arrogance or ignorance. The sun is rising now, painting the snow outside my window with colors that remind me of all the dawns I have witnessed in my long life. Each one was a gift, an opportunity to experience another day of this strange and beautiful existence. I have tried to honor those opportunities as best I could, learning what could be learned, teaching what could be taught, living fully within each moment I was granted. The fire has gone out completely, the last ember darkened to ash. The cold is creeping into my home, reminding me that comfort must be earned through attention and effort. I will build a new fire later, after I have rested. For now, I wrap myself in furs still warm from the night's residual heat and close my eyes. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. The ice taught me many things, but perhaps the most important was this: we are never truly alone. The ancestors walk with us. The descendants wait for us. The animals and plants and elements that make up our world are our relatives in the deepest sense. When we remember this truth, survival becomes not a solitary struggle, but a dance of connection with everything that exists. Sleep well, wherever you are in this wide world. Dream of ice and seals and patient hunters standing motionless beside breathing holes. Dream of communities that support each other through hardship, of wisdom passed from generation to generation, of the endless cycle of challenge and adaptation that has shaped human life since our kind first appeared on this beautiful and difficult planet. And when you wake, remember that the land provides. It always has. It always will. For those who listen, for those who learn, for those who honor the ancient bargain between humans and the world that sustains us. The story is complete now. The fire has burned down. The dawn has come. And somewhere on the frozen sea, the seals are rising to breathe, offering themselves to the patient hunters who wait above, continuing the cycle that has connected our people to this land since the beginning of time. If you have listened this far, if this story has spoken to something in your heart, consider subscribing so you can hear more stories like this one. Leave a comment telling me where you are and what time it is in your world. I would like to know who travels with me through these ancient narratives, who carries these stories forward into times and places I cannot imagine. May your dreams be peaceful. May your challenges be met with wisdom and patience. May you always remember that survival is not about being stronger than the world, but about being wise enough to live within it. Good night and peaceful dreams.